My name is Lana. Born into simplicity, my life was nothing out of the ordinary. My family, though not wealthy in material things, was rich in love and hard work. This foundation propelled me forward, using my brains and determination to snag a spot at a public college where I didn't have to pay tuition. Numbers were my game, and playing it well landed me a degree in accounting. Fresh out of college, I snagged a job at a small company, punching numbers from 9 to 5, and rented a modest apartment that I could call my own. Life was straightforward, predictable, and I liked it that way, until a single invitation turned it all on its head. Lana, you've got to join us this weekend. We're renting a yacht and heading to the coast. It's gonna be epic. Jess, my college roommate and lifelong friend, wasn't taking no for an answer. I hesitated, thinking about the pile of work on my desk. I don't know, Jess. I've got a lot on my plate right now. Come on. You always have a lot on your plate. It's time to let loose for once. Plus, there will be plenty of handsome distractions, she teased, knowing full well how to lure me in. Fast forward, there we were, a bunch of college friends reunited, laughing and soaking up the sun on a yacht that was way fancier than anything I'd imagined. That's when he walked in. John. Older, with that kind of charm that both annoys and attracts you at the same time. He owned the yacht, and from the moment he started talking, I knew he was trouble. So, you're the accountant, Lana? He asked, handing me a drink as we sailed along the coast. That's me. I count beans for a living, I replied, taking the drink but rolling my eyes internally at the cliché line. He laughed, a deep, genuine sound. Well, I hope you're counting these moments too. Not every day you get to escape the office and hit the ocean. Our conversation flowed as if we'd known each other for years. The rest of the group faded into the background. When he suggested going sailing again, just the two of us, I reminded him, I'm here with friends. Without missing a beat, he invited the whole group for another ride. But we all knew it was just me he wanted to talk to. Later, as the day turned into evening and the sky painted itself in shades of orange and pink, he leaned in close. I haven't enjoyed someone's company like this in a long time. How about dinner? Just you and me this time. Sure, but forget fancy. I'm more a beer and fries gal, I told him, setting my expectations straight. After swapping digits with John, I was back to my routine, crunching numbers, paying bills, and trying not to think too much about him. But who was I kidding? The guy had managed to wedge himself into my thoughts, stubborn as a piece of gum stuck on a shoe. Our first beer and fries date was at this dive bar that looked like it hadn't seen a renovation since the 80s. John was already there, nursing a pint when I walked in. Thought you'd bail, he said, sliding over a beer to me. Thought about it, I shot back, taking a sip. The beer was good, cold. But curiosity killed the cat, right? He laughed, that sound that now felt familiar. Glad you're a risk-taker. Our banter was easy, like we were picking up a conversation we'd left off in another life. We talked about everything and nothing, work, movies, our shared disdain for early mornings. It felt natural, comfortable. Too comfortable for just a first date. That night set the pace for what was to come. We were inseparable, a whirlwind of dates, late-night calls, and texts that left me grinning at my phone like a teenager. One evening, as we were closing down another dive bar, John looked at me, a seriousness in his gaze I hadn't seen before. I'm all in, he said, his voice steady. With you, I'm all in. It took me a moment to find my words. I'm scared, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Me too, he said, reaching for my hand. But I think you're worth the risk. That was it for me. The moment I knew this wasn't just a fling, this was something real. Something terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I squeezed his hand back, the future uncertain but suddenly brighter with him in it. Let's do it then, I said, a mix of nerves and excitement bubbling up. Let's be all in. After John and I decided we were all in, life took on a surreal quality, like we were living in a bubble made just for the two of us. but bubbles burst and reality hits. And hit it did, the day I met his mother, Mrs. Grant. Meeting the future mother-in-law felt like stepping into the ring with an opponent you know has more experience. Her home was a fortress, each piece of furniture and decor meticulously chosen, just like the words she used. "So, you're the girl who's captured my son's heart, Lana," she said, her voice cold, her eyes scanning me like I was an equation she was trying to solve. "I guess I am," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. My hands were sweating, and I swear I could feel my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. She hummed, a sound that held no warmth. "Well, I don't see it. But he seems to love you, so I won't stand in the way." Her words were like a slap, hidden behind a veneer of politeness. But what could I do? I just nodded, muttered a thank you, and tried not to let her see how much her disapproval shook me. The wedding, if you could call it that, was modest. We said our vows in a small ceremony, surrounded by a handful of friends and family. I was floating, caught up in the love I felt for John, looking forward to the life we were going to build together. But every time I caught Mrs. Grant's eye, that cold, stern look brought me crashing back down to earth. She watched me, unsmiling, as if she was memorizing my face for a wanted poster. Life after the wedding felt like sailing in uncharted waters. Working at John's company meant being under the same roof as his mother, who seemed to have made it her mission to watch me like a hawk. The office atmosphere was stiff whenever she was around, and I could feel the tension rise like a tide. One day, while I was buried under a mountain of paperwork, John dropped by my desk with a cup of coffee, his way of offering a life raft in the sea of numbers. "Surviving?" he asked, a playful grin on his face. "Just about," I replied, accepting the coffee with a smile. "Your mom's been hovering around all morning. It's like being under surveillance." John's smile faded a bit. "Give it time. She'll come around. Eventually." I wasn't so sure. Later that day, I found myself alone in the break room with Mrs. Grant. Bracing myself, I attempted to break the ice. "I've been thinking of some cost-saving strategies for the next quarter," I started, hoping to steer the conversation towards neutral ground. She turned to me, her expression unreadable. "I'm sure you have many ideas, but this is not your family's little budget. This is my business." The words stung, reminding me of the vast ocean between her world and mine. "I understand that. I'm just trying to help," I responded, struggling to keep my voice steady. Her gaze softened, if only slightly. "I know you are. But understand, this company is my life's work. I won't let anything jeopardize it." Dinners at their family home were a masterclass in navigating stormy seas. John, bless him, tried to lighten the mood with jokes, but they often fell flat, swallowed by the tension between me and his mother. It was during one of these dinners that the underlying current came to a head. "So, how's the new project going?" John asked, attempting to steer the conversation into safe waters. Before I could answer, his mother interjected. "I'm sure we'll hear all about it at the next board meeting. Right?" Her tone was polite, but the message was clear: I was an outsider, tolerated but not accepted. John shot me an apologetic look, but I shook my head slightly, signaling him to let it go. Navigating life with John and the ever-watchful eye of his mother was like trying to sail a boat with no compass. You never quite knew where you were heading. Just when I thought I had managed to steer us into calmer waters, a new storm brewed on the horizon, ready to test our resolve once more. The trouble began with the arrival of the new secretary, Emily. Young, with a flair for fashion that bordered on inappropriate for an office setting, she was the type that turned heads, for all the wrong reasons. It wasn't just her attire that set off alarms, but the way she orbited John, like a moth drawn to a flame. One afternoon, as I was trying to reconcile an accounts report that just wouldn't balance, Emily breezed into my office without knocking. "John's asked for the Henderson file. Said you'd know where it is," she announced, her voice dripping with a sweetness that was almost saccharine. I looked up, fighting the urge to point out the obvious lack of professional boundaries. "It's in the filing cabinet, under H. Alphabetical order, it's not hard to find." She lingered a moment too long, her gaze flickering over the photos on my desk, a silent challenge in her eyes. "Thanks, I'll let him know you were super helpful," she said, her tone suggesting anything but gratitude. The days turned into weeks, and Emily's presence became more pronounced, her behavior more brazen. Whispers started among the staff, rumors of late-night meetings, and closed-door sessions that had nothing to do with business. I tried to brush them off, to trust John, but doubt is a seed that once planted, grows wild and untamed. It all came to a head one evening at a company dinner. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the buzz of success from closing a major deal. I was in the midst of congratulating one of our managers when I saw them, John and Emily, too close, heads bent together in a conversation that seemed to exclude the world around them. My heart pounded in my chest, a mix of anger and betrayal, swirling like a tempest within. I made my way over, my smile fixed in place. "Enjoying the party?" I asked, my voice steady, despite the storm raging inside. John looked up, startled, guilt flashing across his face, before he could mask it with a smile of his own. "Absolutely. Just discussing the next steps with Emily. You know how it is." I turned to Emily, who was looking at me with an expression that could only be described as smug. "I'm sure the next steps can wait until morning. It's time to celebrate now, don't you think?" The ride home was tense, a silence filling the car that was louder than any argument. It was then that I decided to confront the elephant in the room. "Is there something going on between you and Emily?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. John's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "What? No, of course not. She's just enthusiastic about her job, that's all." The weeks that followed were a blur of suspicion and half-truths. Conversations with John became strained, filled with unsaid words and avoided gazes. The office felt like a battleground, each day a struggle to maintain a semblance of normalcy while the storm brewed just beneath the surface. And then it happened. The moment that broke the levee and let the floodwaters rush in. Walking into John's office unannounced, I found them, John and Emily, they were kissing. The world as I knew it shattered, the pieces floating around me like debris in a tempest-tossed sea. Words failed me, and I walked out, the sound of my heart breaking drowned out by the storm that had finally made landfall. After the incident with John and Emily in his office, he tried to brush it off as a fleeting passion, nothing serious. "It was a stupid mistake, it meant nothing," he insisted, trying to downplay the whole affair. I wanted to believe him, wanted to think that we could move past it. Not long after, we were at his mother's house for dinner, a setting that usually had me on edge, but that night was different. Mrs. Grant, with her sharp eye for detail, didn't hesitate to bring up Emily's behavior. "That secretary of yours," she began, her voice laced with disapproval. "She's far too provocative, both in her attire and her demeanor. It would be best if you let her go." I was surprised. Agreeing with her felt like aligning with the enemy, but I found myself nodding. "I think it's the right move." John, however, laughed off the suggestion. "Oh, come on, Lana. This is just jealousy talking, because Emily is attractive. That's all there is to it." His words were like a slap. I felt my cheeks burn, not just from the insult, but from the dismissal of our concerns. Before I could muster a response, his mother did something unexpected. She stood up for me. "John," she said, her tone ice-cold, "you should show your wife the respect she deserves. This has nothing to do with jealousy. It's about propriety, something you seem to have forgotten." John, ever wary of his mother's disapproval, quickly backpedaled. "Sorry, I didn't mean it like that," he mumbled, a sheepish look on his face. But apologies couldn't mend what was broken. One evening, John came home late, his demeanor somber, his decision final. "Emily, she's pregnant with my child. I want a divorce. You've become boring." His words cut deeper than I thought possible. I nodded, numb, as he spoke of his new love waiting for him, and then he left, leaving me in a silence so profound it felt like a void. And then I reached out to the only person I thought might understand, Mrs. Grant. Her reaction surprised me. "He did what?" she hissed through the phone, her usual composure slipping. I repeated the story, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "He's leaving me. For Emily. She's pregnant." There was a heavy silence on the line before she finally spoke. "I'll handle it, Lana," she said, her voice cold and determined. A few days after John left, I was summoned to his mother's house. I expected another round of cold stares and veiled insults. Instead, I was greeted with a surprising warmth. "Sit down, Lana," she said, her tone softer than I'd ever heard. We sat in her impeccably decorated living room, the tension that usually filled the space surprisingly absent. "I won't beat around the bush," she started, getting straight to the point. "John's behavior is unacceptable. We need to address the situation with Emily." I was taken aback by her directness. I don't know what to say. "I thought you'd side with him." Mrs. Grant scoffed, a sound that under different circumstances might have made me flinch. "I didn't raise my son to act like a fool. And Emily, she's been a problem from the start. It's time to clean house." Her plan was simple yet bold. She had already started digging into Emily's employment records and found discrepancies, expenses that couldn't be accounted for, suspicious activity that pointed to embezzlement. "We have enough to fire her and take legal action if necessary," she stated matter-of-factly. "But why are you doing this?" I asked, genuinely curious. "After everything." She fixed me with a look that was both stern and sad. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because, despite our differences, you don't deserve this." After hashing out a plan with John's mom, I was charged with a resolve I hadn't felt in weeks. The next day, I marched into John's office, ready for whatever came my way. There he was, cozying up to Emily like I was just a bad memory. Emily, with that smug look on her face, dared to say, "Looks like you're on the job hunt now, huh?" I couldn't help but smile, a real smile, because I knew what was coming. Pulling out the papers I had meticulously prepared, I laid them out in front of John. "Actually, I've been a bit busy uncovering some interesting facts. Like how your dear Emily here has been playing fast and loose with the company's expense accounts." Emily's face turned a shade paler. "You're just trying to slander me," she shot back, but her voice was less sure, the arrogance slipping. Before either could say more, John's mother strode into the room, the embodiment of cold fury. She looked at her son, her disappointment palpable. "You're fired," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. "Your escapades with Emily and your negligence have cost you your position." John's face went white, his confident demeanor crumbling right before our eyes. He fell to his knees, begging his mother for forgiveness, a pathetic sight that would have been pitiable if it weren't so justified. But the real kicker was Emily's reaction. The moment she heard John was out of his job, her tune changed faster than a skipped track. "You know what, John? I was never pregnant," she said, her voice cold, all pretense of affection gone. "I don't need some broke guy hanging around me." She tried to strut out of the office, but Mrs. Grant stood in her way, solid as a rock. "Not so fast. You're going to return every single penny of the $20,000 you took from the company," she demanded, her voice sharp as a blade. Emily's face went from smug to shocked in a heartbeat. "You can't prove anything," she bluffed, but her voice was shaky. "Oh, we have all the proof we need. Pay up, or we'll see you in court," John's mom retorted, not giving an inch. In the end, Emily was booted out of the company and had to cough up the stolen money under the threat of legal action. Watching her walk out of the office, defeated, was a sight I never knew I needed to see. It was over. John was a mess on the floor, and Emily was out of our lives for good. After the whole debacle with John and Emily, I did what I had to do. I divorced John. And let me tell you, I made sure I got a fair shake in the compensation department. But just when I thought I was out, ready to start fresh somewhere new, Mrs. Grant, my former mother-in-law, threw me a curveball. She called me into her office one morning, just as I was getting my ducks in a row to leave the company and, honestly, all this mess behind. "Sit down, Lana," she said, not wasting any breath on niceties. It was all business, which, coming from her, wasn't a surprise. "I'm planning on leaving," I blurted out before she could get another word in. "I think it's for the best, given everything." She held up a hand, stopping me mid-sentence. "I want you to stay. Take over as temporary director." Her words knocked the wind out of me. "What? Why would you want that? After everything that's happened?" Mrs. Grant leaned back in her chair, eyeing me with that sharp gaze of hers. "Because you're good at what you do. And because I think you're the best shot this company has at bouncing back from this mess." I was stunned, to say the least. The offer was unexpected, especially coming from her. "You really think I can do it?" I asked, skepticism lacing my words. "Yes, I do. You've got a head for business and a knack for making tough decisions. That's what we need right now." So, that's what I did. I stayed. Took the reins as the temporary director and poured everything I had into the job. Months into my new role, Mrs. Grant and I found ourselves working late, something that had become the norm rather than the exception. One evening, after a long day of meetings and decisions, Mrs. Grant and I shared a quiet moment over a cup of tea. It was a small gesture, but it symbolized how far we'd come. "You know, I never expected this," I admitted, cradling the warm mug in my hands. "After everything that happened, I thought I'd be on my own." Mrs. Grant looked at me, her expression thoughtful. "Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it? We find allies in the most unlikely places." I smiled, a sense of peace settling over me. "Yes, it does. And I'm grateful for it." Months turned into a year since I took the helm as the temporary director, and what a year it was. The company had stabilized, and we were actually seeing growth again. It was hard work, but rewarding in ways I couldn't have imagined. Mrs. Grant and I had become a formidable team, a fact that still amazed me when I stopped to think about it. One crisp morning, as autumn painted the city in hues of orange and red, Mrs. Grant called me into her office for what I assumed was our regular strategy meeting. But the look on her face told me this was something different. "Lana," she began, her tone more solemn than usual. "I've been doing some thinking about the future, my future, and the future of this company." I took a seat, a knot forming in my stomach. "Okay, I'm listening." She took a deep breath, her gaze meeting mine. "I'm planning to retire." The words hit me like a ton of bricks. "Retire? But you're the heart of this company." "Are you sure?" "Yes, I'm sure," she replied with a nod. "It's time. Time for me to enjoy life outside of these walls. And it's time for new leadership here." My mind raced with the implications of her words. "What does this mean for the company? For me?" "It means," she said, pausing for emphasis, "that I want you to take over as the permanent CEO." The silence that followed was heavy with shock and realization. "Me? Are you serious?" "Completely serious," she affirmed. "You've proven yourself more than capable. You've earned this." The responsibility was enormous, the prospect both exhilarating and terrifying. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll do it," she urged, a rare smile breaking through her usual stoic demeanor. "Say you'll lead this company into its next chapter." I took a moment, letting the weight of her offer sink in. Then, with a deep breath, I found my resolve. "I'll do it. I'll give it everything I've got." "Good," she said, her approval evident. I knew I made the right choice. As the days turned to weeks, and my new role became reality, Mrs. Grant and I grew even closer, our relationship evolving from mere acquaintances to genuine friends. It was an unexpected turn of events, but one I cherished deeply. John, on the other hand, was left with nothing. His mother, firm in her decisions, took back everything she had given him, the expensive car, the yacht, all of it. He was jobless, without the luxury he was so accustomed to, all because he chose betrayal over family. My future was bright, filled with new challenges and opportunities. And while John was a chapter of my past I wished to forget, the lessons I learned and the relationships I built were my stepping stones to a better tomorrow.